In this tutorial, I'd like to go through the workflow of dealing with pesky borders. There may be cases where you're drawing boundary information from two different data sets, and the border lines are at a different resolution or a different level of quality. Now, it's problematic, obviously, for accuracy reasons if you have more accuracy in one part of the map than you have in another, but at a small scale, when you're zoomed out like this, it may not be terribly important, but you still want the higher quality border data, such as in this case, I'm drawing the China information from a kind of a dissolved layer of prefectures from the China Historical GIS project from their 1911 data. And these other countries I have clipped out of a natural earth contemporary borders. Obviously, for the time period I'm interested in, these borders are not all accurate, but I've been playing with it in order to develop some historical border data sets. I'd like to keep the really rich and detailed coastlines that they have for the China data. So I've cut out the China that was used in the natural earth data, and I am going to be using this other one instead. The problem is, as you can see when you zoom in, is that the borders of Russia in the natural earth data overlaps with the China data, but it also has areas where it falls short because the China data has the other piece of this. So what do you do when you have lots of examples like this throughout your map? Well, one thing obviously that you can do is, for the less accurate, the border that you don't trust or that you don't want to use, you can go in and edit it, and using the vertex tool, you can go and manually fiddle with the borders and move them where you want. Obviously, there are places behind this that you'll need to also delete. So it's a real pain, and it would be a very arduous task and tedious task to go through and do this for the whole thing. So what can we do instead? Basically, we can reawaken the toddler in all of us and get out our Play-Doh and our cookie cutters and start fixing this with the use of a series of mostly difference calls. So in order to do this, the first step I'm going to do is to create a new scratch layer, and I'm going to set it to polygon, and I'm going to choose the CRS that I've been using for my project. And now I have a new scratch layer. And what am I going to do with this scratch layer? Basically, I'm going to create, you have to do this per border of country because this feature of Russia is different than the feature of Korea. But on a per border basis, I'm now going to create a new polygon that captures. It doesn't have to fit exactly. You just need to capture all of the areas that overlap with the border where you have problematic sections. Ideally, to be on the safe side, you catch the whole thing. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a kind of an overlay that captures everything. Okay, so, I mean, ideally you would go right across the border here like that. And then on the China side of things, let's move in and see where we can make sure we capture everything on the China-Russia border. Okay, and I'm going to right click, and now I have this new scratch layer that is basically just covering up all of the problematic border section. All right, so what do we do? Well, first I'm going to save this. Remember that there were some areas of the China border that didn't fall short, but actually overlapped the Russia border. So because I trust the China border more for the time period that I'm interested in, I'd like to take this China and treat it as a cookie cutter to cut away from the Russia section in those cases where it overlaps. In fact, if I'm going to be doing this for all of these borders, I want to cut away the places that are underneath the China map here. So to do that, I'm going to use difference and the thing that I'd like to keep is, or the thing I'm cutting away from is my base map in this case. And the thing that I'm using as a cookie cutter, which is going to cut things away from the base map, is the China clip. And if I click run, it's quite a complex border, so it takes some time. If you try this and you get errors, it may be that you have so-called invalid geometries, and you'll need to use the processing toolbox to check the validity first, find out where those problems are, and either directly fix them yourself or use the fixed geometries feature before you can do this. In this case, it worked. So now I ended up with a kind of a new layer, which is a little bit different than the old one. So here's the old one, here is the new one. And you'll see that it has cut out this area that was once part of the late Qing dynasty, and some areas here, some areas there. And if you zoom in, you'll see that there's probably hundreds of these small areas as well. Okay, so this is now the one we're going to be working with. Okay, so I'm going to rename this just so that I know what I'm talking about. New base map. But we're not done, because if I now take and turn on the China clip and zoom in, we'll see that, oops, let me deselect, that there are still areas where, although we have clipped away the parts that we need to clip away, we have areas that we need to fill in. So how can we fill in this in the case of the Russia border? Well, just a second ago, we created a new scratch layer that overlapped the entire border. I'm going to call this diff0, just to keep track of these layers. And what I want to do is I want to cut away the China bit and then the Russia bit. And what I will have left of this red piece is only the bit that neither of them were able to cut away from. That is, I'll be filling in the middle. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go back to Geoprocessing Tools, choose Difference. And what is it I want to cut away from? Diff0. What am I going to use to cut away from it? The China clip. Let's run that. Okay, that one's done. We don't actually need the diff0 anymore, but I'll just turn it off. And you'll see now that the China has cut away from the diff0 and left us with difference. So now I'm going to rename this diff1. I'm just doing this so I can keep track of things. Now we need to do the same thing for the Russia side of things. So I'm going to now go back to my geoprocessing tools, do difference, diff1, and we want to cut off the areas that overlap with the new base map. Close, and it created yet another one. I'm going to call this diff2. And if I now turn off diff1, you can't even see diff2. You will be able to see it if you zoom in though. You'll see that we now have a layer that consists of nothing but the areas that are not filled in. So what do I do now that I have this new layer? I don't just leave it there. I would now like to reattach this diff2 to the less accurate of the maps. In this case, the Russia border. Because I'm trusting the China border as canonical in this case, I now want this diff2 to go back into this Russia polygon over here. Okay, so just to reduce the confusion, I'm going to get rid of the other diffs. And this diff2, I'm going to edit it. Oh, sorry, I don't even need to edit it. I can just select all of the pieces of it. And if I zoom in, you'll see that they are now yellow. And I'm now going to copy these features. And in my base map 2, where this thing does not exist, I'm going to turn editing on, and I'm going to paste the features in. So now you see it's pasted this material in, but let's not leave it at that. What I want these features to be a part of is Russia. So I'm going to control click to choose Russia. So I have now chosen Russia and the pieces that were missing. And I'm going to merge these pieces together. And you may want to deal with problems with differences in metadata between them. But once merged, if I zoom in now, if I save my changes, if I zoom in now, we'll see that I now have a nice clean border between the two of them, and I have basically filled in that border. Now, obviously, my example of China is complicated by the fact that we have lots of borders that we need to deal with. I need to repeat this process for each of the bordering countries. You can't do it all at once, because in that final stage where you're merging the polygon, if I had just merged the polygon with Russia, then obviously I would be granting Russia territory along the border of Burma. So doing it by country is a way that you can ensure that the final step attaches the territory to the polygon in the less accurate map for the appropriate country concerned.